There are moments in history when old answers stop working, not because they are proven false, but because they no longer feel alive. Nietzsche believed that modern humanity lives in such a moment. For a long time, people did not need to ask what life meant. Meaning was already given, through religion, through tradition, through moral rules passed down from generation to generation. Life had a structure. Good and evil were defined. Purpose felt inherited. But Nietzsche observed something changing. People still repeated the old words, but they no longer trusted them in the same way. Belief became habit. Morality became routine. Meaning became something remembered rather than felt. This is where the quiet crisis begins. Not as rebellion, not as chaos, but as distance. The distance between what is said and what is believed. The distance between rules and inner conviction. Nietzsche did not see this as a moral failure. He saw it as a psychological one, a condition where the mind continues to follow values that no longer persuade the heart. When this happens, life starts to feel strangely empty. Not painful in a dramatic way, but dull. Tasks continue, goals exist, routines remain. But something inside no longer responds. Why am I doing this? What is this for? What is the point of effort? These questions do not appear because a person is lazy. They appear because old answers no longer satisfy. Nietzsche believed this was not an accident. He thought it was the result of a long historical process. Science replaced faith. Reason replaced authority. Explanation replaced mystery. This brought freedom, but it also removed the center. When everything can be questioned, nothing automatically commands meaning. The individual is left alone with the task of deciding what matters. At first, this feels like liberation. No more imposed truths, no more unquestioned rules. But slowly, another feeling enters. Uncertainty. Without inherited meaning, life becomes open, and openness can feel heavy. Because now value is no longer discovered. It must be created. Many people are not prepared for this task, so they continue living as if old meanings still function. They work, they consume, they succeed, they repeat. But beneath this movement, there is a quiet fatigue. Nietzsche saw this fatigue everywhere, not in despair but in indifference, not in rebellion but in resignation. Life continues, but it feels thinner. This is what Nietzsche meant when he said that something essential had collapsed, not the world, not society, but meaning itself. He did not claim that life had no value. He claimed that the old sources of value no longer worked as they once did. This is not a tragedy in his eyes. It is a transition, a moment where humanity must learn to stand without borrowed meaning, to ask, what do I affirm? What do I choose? What do I consider worthy? This question is not meant to create anxiety. It is meant to awaken responsibility, because when meaning is no longer inherited, it becomes personal. And when it becomes personal, it can also become deeper. Nietzsche believed that this moment, however uncomfortable, was also full of possibility. Not because it is easy, but because it is honest. For the first time, life is not guided by what must be believed, but by what can be created. Tonight, there is nothing to solve. No value must be rebuilt. No answer must be found. Only the awareness that life is open, and that this openness is not a threat. It is an invitation. An invitation to rest without pretending certainty. An invitation to breathe without borrowed meaning. And an invitation to sleep, not because everything is explained, but because nothing needs to be explained right now. When Nietzsche wrote God is dead, he was not making a religious argument. He was not trying to prove that God does not exist. He was describing a cultural and psychological shift. For centuries, God had been more than a belief. God had been a center of truth, a center of morality, a center of meaning. People did not only believe in God, they organized their lives around this belief. Right and wrong came from it. Purpose came from it. Hope came from it. Nietzsche saw that this center was losing its power. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but quietly. People still spoke the language of faith, but their trust had moved elsewhere, to science, to reason, to human explanation. The world was no longer understood as something given by a higher order, but as something that could be analyzed, measured, and explained. This change brought confidence. Human beings felt stronger, smarter, more independent. But Nietzsche noticed something else. When God stopped being the highest reference point, nothing clearly replaced him. The structure remained, but the foundation weakened. Rules still existed, but their authority felt fragile. Morality was still taught, but it no longer felt unquestionable. Nietzsche's phrase, God is dead, means this. The old source of meaning has lost its convincing power. It no longer shapes the inner life the way it once did. This does not mean people became immoral. It means morality became uncertain. Why should I live this way? Why should I sacrifice? Why should I obey this rule? Before, these questions had ready answers. Now, they require personal justification. This is where unease begins. Not because faith disappears, but because certainty disappears. Nietzsche believed this was one of the most important moments in human history, because when the highest meaning collapses, everything beneath it trembles. Truth becomes relative. Values become negotiable. Life feels less anchored. This does not create immediate chaos. It creates confusion, a slow drifting. People still live as before. They work, they build families, they pursue goals. But something inside is no longer grounded. The question why becomes harder to answer. Why this career? Why this lifestyle? Why this struggle? Without a higher reference, life begins to feel like a project rather than a calling. Nietzsche did not celebrate this collapse, but he did not try to undo it either. He believed it was irreversible. Once meaning is questioned, it cannot return to innocence. Once the foundation is examined, it cannot be unseen. This is why he saw danger in nostalgia. Trying to return to old beliefs without inner conviction creates emptiness. It creates a life that repeats forms without sharing their spirit. This is one of the reasons modern life often feels hollow. Not because nothing exists to believe in, but because belief itself has changed shape. It has become optional, chosen rather than inherited, and this choice can feel heavy. Because when nothing is guaranteed, everything becomes responsibility. Nietzsche thought this moment required courage, not the courage to believe again, but the courage to live without inherited certainty. This is not despair, it is exposure. Human beings are now exposed to their own freedom. They must ask, what do I hold sacred? What do I obey? What do I live for? At night, these questions feel larger, because distractions fall away. The mind becomes quieter. The old answers echo more faintly. Nietzsche did not think this silence was meaningless. He thought it was necessary, because only when the old center dissolves can a new orientation appear. Not imposed, not inherited, but formed. This is why the death of God is not the end of meaning. It is the end of borrowed meaning, and the beginning of something more difficult, the task of creating value from within life itself. Tonight, nothing must be solved. You do not need to rebuild meaning. You do not need to answer the great questions. It is enough to notice that certainty has loosened, and that this looseness does not have to be feared. It can be rested within. You can let the mind be quiet without asking it to decide what the world means. Meaning does not need to be carried into sleep. It can wait, and in this waiting the body finds its rhythm again. Breath returns to itself. Thought slows. Effort softens. Not because everything is clear, but because nothing needs to be clear right now. Nihilism is often described as a philosophy, but Nietzsche did not see it only as an idea. He saw it as a condition of the soul, a state of mind. It appears when values lose their force and nothing clearly takes their place. Life continues, but direction weakens. Effort remains, but purpose fades. This is why nihilism is not always dramatic. It does not always look like despair. It often looks like tiredness. People still move forward. They still work, plan, and strive. But something inside no longer feels engaged. The world feels lighter in meaning and heavier in effort. Nietzsche believed this feeling was spreading through modern society, not because people were becoming weaker, but because the old foundations were dissolving. When inherited values no longer convince, the mind begins to ask, why do this? Why care? Why struggle? These questions are not signs of laziness. They are signs of awakening. But awakening without orientation can feel like falling. This is where nihilism becomes psychological. It is not the belief that nothing exists, it is the feeling that nothing truly matters. And this feeling can quietly shape behavior. People may still pursue success, but without inner enthusiasm. They may still desire comfort, but without deep satisfaction. They may still follow rules, but without conviction. Nietzsche noticed this contradiction. A life full of activity but empty of affirmation. This creates a special kind of exhaustion, not physical, not emotional, existential, a sense that effort is being spent without being justified. That movement continues without inner agreement. Nihilism, in this sense, is not a theory about the world. It is a relationship with life, a way of standing inside existence without feeling grounded in it. Nietzsche believed this condition was unavoidable in a time when old meanings collapse. It is the natural result of losing a central source of value. At first, the mind tries to compensate. It seeks distraction. It multiplies goals. It fills time. But distraction does not create meaning. It only delays the question. Eventually, the question returns. What is all this for? This is where nihilism becomes visible. Not in destruction, but in indifference. Not in rebellion, but in numbness. Nietzsche saw this as dangerous, not because it causes chaos, but because it weakens the will. When nothing feels truly valuable, the desire to create also weakens. Life becomes something to endure rather than something to shape. This is why he did not treat nihilism as a final position. He treated it as a symptom, a sign that humanity had outgrown its old meanings but had not yet created new ones. In this gap, the soul becomes tired. It does not know what to aim at. At night, this tiredness becomes clearer, without tasks, without noise, without performance. The mind feels the absence of direction more directly. Thoughts wander. Questions appear. Motivation softens. Nietzsche did not think this was a failure. He thought it was honest, because it shows that borrowed values no longer satisfy, that inherited purposes no longer persuade. This discomfort is not meaningless. It signals a transition, a moment when the human being must learn to choose rather than obey, to affirm rather than inherit. This is difficult. It requires inner strength, not physical strength, but the strength to stand without ready-made answers. Nihilism, in Nietzsche's view, is the night before creation. Not the end of value, but the end of imposed value. It clears a space, a quiet space, where the question of meaning can be asked without illusion. Tonight, there is no need to answer it. You do not need to decide what makes life worth living. It is enough to notice that the question exists, and that this question is not a threat. It is a sign that life is asking to be taken seriously, to be shaped, not just followed, to be chosen, not just repeated. For now, the mind can rest without resolving this. It can let the question remain open. Breathing does not require meaning. The body does not ask for purpose to relax. In this stillness, nihilism loses its weight. It becomes not a verdict, but a pause before something new can be imagined. And in this pause, sleep can arrive without explanation. Not because life has an answer, but because the mind is allowed to be quiet inside the question. When meaning begins to fade, the mind often turns toward comfort, not as a solution but as a replacement. If life no longer feels meaningful, at least it can feel pleasant. If purpose weakens, at least pain can be avoided. Nietzsche observed this movement carefully. He saw that modern life, faced with the loss of deep values, did not become tragic. It became comfortable. People did not collapse into despair. They adjusted. They sought safety, stability, predictable routines. Comfort became a quiet ideal, not happiness in a deep sense, but ease, not fulfillment, but absence of disturbance. Nietzsche did not think this was a moral failure. He saw it as a psychological response. When the question, why live, becomes heavy, the mind looks for something lighter: entertainment, consumption, small pleasures, regular habits. These do not create meaning, but they soften its absence. And for a while this seems to work. Life feels smoother, less intense, more manageable. But Nietzsche noticed something important. Comfort does not answer the question of value. It distracts from it. It does not say what life is for. It only makes life easier to tolerate. This is why comfort can feel strangely empty. There is no depth in it, no direction, only repetition. Days become similar. Goals become modest. Risk disappears. The soul becomes calm, but also flat. Nietzsche believed this was dangerous, not because comfort is bad, but because it replaces striving. When comfort becomes the highest aim, life no longer reaches beyond itself. It no longer dares. It no longer creates. It no longer asks for more than survival. This produces a new kind of human being, a human being who wants peace more than meaning, safety more than truth, stability more than growth. Nietzsche did not see this as cruel or selfish. He saw it as tired, a tiredness of wanting, a tiredness of choosing, a tiredness of struggling with deep questions. Comfort offers rest from these tensions, but it also removes the pressure that leads to creation. At night, this becomes visible. Without tasks, without entertainment, without goals, the mind feels the lack of direction again. Comfort can fill time, but it cannot fill significance. It can calm the nerves, but it cannot give reason. This is why people can feel safe and still feel empty, why life can be easy and still feel heavy. Nietzsche believed that comfort, when taken as a final answer, produces a shallow form of existence, not painful but thin, not tragic but dull. Life continues, but it does not rise. This does not mean comfort should be rejected. It means it should not be confused with meaning. Warmth is not purpose, ease is not value, pleasure is not direction. These things can support life, but they cannot justify it. Nietzsche thought that the modern world was slowly replacing deep values with manageable ones. Instead of asking what is worth suffering for, people began to ask how suffering can be avoided. Instead of asking what is worth becoming, they asked how life can be made easier. This shift feels gentle, but it changes everything. Because when comfort becomes the goal, life stops pointing beyond itself. At night, when nothing is being achieved, this difference is felt more clearly. There is no comfort project to complete, no distraction to hold on to, only the quiet presence of a life that still asks, "What is this for?" Nietzsche did not think this question should be silenced. He thought it should be faced, not with fear, but with courage, not with despair, but with honesty. Comfort can soften the edges of life, but it cannot give life a center. That center must be created, not tonight, not now. Tonight it is enough to notice that ease is not meaning, and that meaning does not need to be found in order for rest to arrive. The body does not require purpose to sleep. The breath does not ask why it moves, and the mind, for this moment, can let go of the need to replace meaning with comfort. It can simply be still. When meaning begins to disappear, not everyone reacts in the same way. Some resist, some search, some withdraw. Nietzsche gave a name to one of the most common reactions: passive nihilism. It does not look dramatic, it does not shout, it does not destroy, it simply settles. Passive nihilism appears when a person accepts that life has no higher meaning and decides not to struggle with this fact. Instead of asking, "What should I live for?" the mind quietly shifts to, "How can I be comfortable?" Life becomes smaller, not because it is forced to be, but because it is chosen to be. The Stoics spoke of endurance. Nietzsche spoke of exhaustion. Passive nihilism is not courage, it is fatigue. A fatigue of questioning, a fatigue of hoping, a fatigue of creating values. The person still lives, still works, still plans. But the deeper yes to life is missing. Nietzsche believed this condition would become widespread in modern society, not because people were weak, but because they were overwhelmed by the loss of old certainties. When religion no longer commands trust and tradition no longer convinces, the individual is left alone with choice. Choice can feel like freedom, but it can also feel like burden. Passive nihilism chooses relief from this burden. It says, "I will not search for meaning. I will not ask what is worth living for. I will simply aim for comfort and stability." This seems peaceful at first. Life becomes predictable. Risk is avoided. Deep conflict disappears. But Nietzsche saw a hidden cost. Without meaning, desire weakens. Without desire, the will weakens. And without will, life loses intensity. The person no longer wants much, but they also no longer become much. This creates a special kind of sadness, not sharp, not dramatic, flat. Days pass without inner movement. Success feels neutral. Failure feels tolerable. Nothing touches the core. Nietzsche feared that passive nihilism would produce a new type of human being. A human being who wants only to be safe, to be comfortable, to be undisturbed. Not evil, not cruel, but small. He did not use this word as an insult. He used it as a diagnosis. A life without struggle may avoid pain, but it also avoids greatness. At night, this condition becomes visible. When nothing demands attention, when no task fills the mind, there is a quiet feeling of, "Is this all?" Not in anger, in softness, a mild emptiness. Nietzsche did not think passive nihilism should be attacked. He thought it should be understood. It is the mind's way of protecting itself from too much uncertainty. If meaning cannot be trusted, then at least comfort can. If values collapse, then at least routine remains. This is not cowardice, it is survival. But Nietzsche believed survival is not the same as living. Passive nihilism keeps life going, but it does not let it rise. It accepts the absence of meaning instead of transforming it. It says, there is nothing worth striving for, and then adjusts life to this belief. This is why Nietzsche did not stop at this form of nihilism. He saw it as a stage, not a destination. A moment of rest after old values fall, but before new ones are created. Tonight, you do not need to reject comfort. You do not need to fight fatigue. It is enough to notice that wanting less is not the same as wanting nothing, that settling is not the same as choosing. The body can rest without deciding what life should mean. Breath can slow without needing a goal, and the mind for now can simply recognize this quiet condition without judging it, not as a failure, not as a final answer, but as a pause in a longer movement, a night between old meanings and new ones. Not everyone responds to the loss of meaning by withdrawing. Some respond by confronting it. Nietzsche called this second response active nihilism. If passive nihilism says, there is nothing worth striving for, active nihilism says, what has been called meaningful must be questioned. It does not settle into comfort. It does not soften the problem. It turns toward it. Active nihilism begins with destruction, but not out of hatred. It begins with refusal. A refusal to live by values that no longer convince the heart. A refusal to obey rules that feel empty. A refusal to continue as if nothing has changed. Nietzsche believed this kind of nihilism was more honest. It does not hide from the collapse of meaning, it looks directly at it. It says, if the old values are hollow, they must fall. This sounds dangerous, and it is. Because when values are destroyed, nothing stands in their place yet. Active nihilism clears the ground, but it does not build immediately. It creates a space without guidance, without rules, without inherited purpose. For many, this space feels frightening. Without shared meaning, life seems exposed. The mind may feel suspended between what no longer works and what has not yet appeared. Nietzsche understood this risk. He did not romanticize active nihilism. He did not present it as a solution. He saw it as a transition, a painful but necessary moment between old worlds and new ones. Active nihilism is uncomfortable because it removes illusions. It strips away borrowed beliefs. It removes automatic justifications. Nothing is sacred by habit anymore. But Nietzsche believed this discomfort had value. It prevents false peace. It stops the mind from resting in beliefs it no longer trusts. Instead of numbing the problem, it sharpens it. Instead of replacing meaning with comfort, it leaves meaning open. This openness is heavy, but it is also powerful, because once values are no longer inherited, they can be created. But creation requires emptiness first. The Stoics sought peace through acceptance. Nietzsche sought depth through confrontation. Active nihilism is not calm. It is restless. It is the moment when the soul refuses to lie to itself. At night, this refusal can feel strong. Without noise and activity, Old certainties lose their weight. Questions become louder. Why do I live this way? Why do I believe this? Why do I accept this path? These questions can disturb sleep if they are treated as problems to solve. But Nietzsche did not think they should be answered immediately. He thought they should be endured. To remain with uncertainty without rushing back to comfort is already a form of strength. Active nihilism is not about despair. It is about honesty. It does not say, "Nothing matters." It says, "What has mattered must be re-examined." This is not destruction for its own sake. It is clearing space for something that does not yet exist. Nietzsche believed that only a human being who can pass through this emptiness without collapsing is capable of creating new values. Not copying, not inheriting, not repeating, but shaping. Active nihilism is the moment when the mind stops leaning on what is already given. It stands alone, not comfortably, not peacefully, but freely. Tonight you do not need to destroy values. You do not need to question your life. It is enough to notice that some answers no longer feel true, and that this does not mean life has failed. It means life is asking to be taken seriously. The body does not need meaning to rest. The breath does not need a worldview to slow. And the mind, even with its questions, can be allowed to be quiet. Uncertainty does not have to be solved in the dark. It can simply be held without fear. And in this holding, sleep can arrive not because meaning has returned, but because the mind is no longer pretending that it never left. When meaning weakens, the first feeling is not always sadness. It is often heaviness, a quiet loss of energy, a fading of interest, a sense that effort no longer leads anywhere important. Nietzsche noticed that this state can easily be confused with illness. It looks like depression, but it is not only emotional, it is existential. The mind is not only tired, it is unconvinced. It no longer knows what justifies struggle. When values collapse, motivation collapses with them. Not because the body is broken, but because direction is missing. This is why nihilism often feels psychological. The symptoms appear in feeling, but the cause lies in meaning. The person may still function, still work, still fulfill duties, but inside there is a quiet question. Why does any of this matter? This question does not always sound dramatic. It can feel dull, a slow erosion of enthusiasm. Nietzsche believed modern humanity was entering this condition, not because life was becoming worse, but because it was becoming unclear. Without a higher aim, desire weakens. Without desire, movement becomes mechanical. The person continues living, but no longer affirms life. This creates a special kind of sadness. Not despair, not crisis, emptiness. The Stoics spoke of tranquility. Nietzsche spoke of vitality. This state has neither. It is not calm, and it is not alive. It sits in between. This is why it feels like depression. There is withdrawal, there is fatigue, there is loss of interest. But Nietzsche did not think this should be treated only as a problem to remove. He thought it was a signal, a sign that inherited meanings no longer nourish the soul. The mind is not broken. It is unsatisfied. It is waiting for something that has not yet been created. Modern life offers many comforts but few reasons, many distractions but little direction. This mismatch produces inner tension. The body rests but the will does not. The mind relaxes but the question remains. What is this for? Nietzsche believed that when this question is avoided, the feeling deepens. People become passive. They accept small pleasures instead of deep goals. They settle instead of rising. This is not because they are weak, it is because the world no longer tells them what is worth becoming. In older times, meaning was given. Now it must be chosen. This transition is heavy. It requires strength not of muscles but of spirit. The strength to live without ready-made purpose, to endure uncertainty without escaping into numbness. At night, this condition becomes clearer. When the day's roles fall away, the emptiness is felt more directly. There is no task to hide in, no goal to chase, only the feeling that life is waiting for something more. Nietzsche did not think this feeling should be silenced. He thought it should be listened to. It is the voice of a life that wants to mean something again, not through rules, not through borrowed ideals, but through creation. This does not mean you must find your purpose tonight. It means you can allow the question to exist without fear. Breathing does not require meaning. Rest does not require direction. For now, it is enough to notice that emptiness is not the end of life. It is the end of old life. A pause before something new can be imagined. The mind can rest even inside this pause. It does not need to fix itself. It does not need to answer. It only needs permission to stop carrying the weight of meaning into sleep. The night does not ask what you live for. It only offers stillness. And in this stillness, the question can sleep beside you without disturbing rest. When old meanings fall away, the human being does not disappear. Life continues. People still wake up, they still work, they still speak, plan, and move. But something essential has shifted. Nietzsche was interested in this moment, not in catastrophe, but in adaptation. What kind of human appears after meaning collapses? Not a monster, not a rebel, a quieter figure, a human who lives without a strong why. This new human is not dramatic. They do not shout against the world. They do not demand new truths. They adjust. They lower expectations. They soften desires. They avoid strong commitments. Nietzsche saw this as a survival strategy. When great meanings vanish, great efforts feel unnecessary. If nothing is truly sacred, then nothing is worth extreme devotion. Life becomes practical. Goals become manageable. Dreams become modest. Risk becomes something to avoid. This human does not seek tragedy. They seek comfort. Not because comfort is noble, but because meaning is absent. Nietzsche did not hate this figure. He understood it. This human is tired of carrying heavy questions. They do not want to decide what life should be. They want peace, they want stability, they want security. But Nietzsche saw a danger here. When the human being no longer reaches beyond itself, life shrinks. Not physically, but spiritually. There is less tension, less striving, less intensity. Joy becomes small. Pain becomes intolerable. The scale of life changes. Instead of asking, "What should I become?" the question becomes, "How can I stay comfortable?" Instead of asking, "What is worth suffering for?" the question becomes, "How can suffering be avoided?" This is not evil. It is a sign of exhaustion. Nietzsche believed that modern humanity was drifting toward this condition, not because it had failed, but because it had lost direction. When the old compass breaks, movement continues, but without orientation. At night, this human feels something strange. Not despair, not crisis. A quiet sense that life is smaller than it once promised to be. They are not unhappy, but they are not deeply alive. Nietzsche thought this state was the result of losing higher aims without creating new ones. The human being becomes careful instead of creative, cautious instead of daring, satisfied instead of striving. This does not produce pain. It produces flatness, a smooth life without peaks, a peaceful life without depth. Nietzsche believed this was dangerous, not because it harms the body, but because it weakens the spirit. Without great goals, the will becomes small. Without strong values, desire becomes weak. Life becomes something to be maintained rather than shaped. This human does not destroy values. They live without them. They do not rebel. They adapt. And this adaptation feels safe. But Nietzsche thought that safety is not the same as life. Life, for him, meant tension. It meant becoming. It meant overcoming. Without this movement, existence becomes repetitive. Days resemble each other. Years pass quietly. At night, this repetition becomes visible. There is nothing urgent to do, nothing important to become. Only rest remains. Nietzsche did not think this rest was evil. He thought it was incomplete. It is the rest of a life that no longer asks what it could be. Tonight you do not need to become anything. You do not need to define your future. It is enough to notice that life can feel smaller when meaning fades, and that this smallness is not final. It is a stage, a moment in a longer movement from collapse to creation. The body can rest even while life is unfinished. Breath can slow even while meaning is unclear. And the mind can sleep not because everything is settled, but because nothing needs to be decided in the dark. Nietzsche did not describe the collapse of meaning in order to leave humanity there. He did not analyze nihilism so that life could remain empty. He believed that stopping at collapse would be another form of resignation. To see that old values no longer work, and to accept this as final would only deepen fatigue. So he did not stop with diagnosis. He moved forward. Nietzsche saw the loss of inherited meaning not only as a crisis, but as a condition that could lead either to shrinking or to transformation. Passive nihilism shrinks life. Active nihilism clears space. But something must follow. Otherwise, the emptiness remains only emptiness. Nietzsche did not believe that humanity could live permanently without values. The mind needs orientation. The will needs direction. If old values collapse, new ones must appear. But these new values cannot come from tradition. They cannot be borrowed. They cannot be repeated. They must be created. This is why Nietzsche did not end with "nothing matters." He asked a different question. What could matter after old meanings have fallen? This question does not seek comfort. It seeks affirmation. Not escape from life, but a deeper yes to life. Nietzsche believed that nihilism was a transitional phase, a bridge between inherited values and created values. But many people become tired on this bridge. They stop walking. They turn emptiness into a resting place. Nietzsche refused this. He believed that staying in nihilism meant staying in weakness, not physical weakness, but spiritual hesitation, a refusal to choose, a refusal to shape. This is why he spoke of overcoming nihilism, not by returning to old beliefs, but by moving forward. Forward into uncertainty, forward into creation. He did not mean inventing random rules. He meant discovering what could be affirmed from within life itself, not from heaven, not from tradition, not from authority, from existence, from struggle, from growth, from becoming. Nietzsche believed that life itself could become the source of value, not as comfort, but as intensity, not as safety, but as movement. He saw danger in lives that aim only at stability. He believed that meaning comes from tension, from effort, from overcoming. This is why he did not describe the collapse of meaning as a tragedy. He described it as an opening, a moment when humanity is no longer told what to value, and must learn to value on its own. This task is heavy. It requires courage. Not the courage to obey, but the courage to choose, to say, this matters to me. This is worth my strength. This is worth my time. Nietzsche believed that only a human being who passes through nihilism without settling into it can reach this point, not by denying emptiness, but by using it. Emptiness becomes space. Space becomes possibility. At night, this movement is felt quietly. There is no instruction, no command, no inherited path, only the feeling that life is open. This openness can feel frightening, but it can also feel light. There is no role to perform, no meaning to repeat, only presence. Nietzsche did not want people to fall asleep in nihilism. He wanted them to wake up beyond it. But tonight, you do not need to overcome anything. You do not need to create values. You do not need to choose a path. It is enough to notice that emptiness is not the end of thought. It is the place where thought can begin again. The body does not need meaning to rest. The breath does not need direction to slow. And the mind can rest inside openness without rushing to fill it. Meaning does not need to be rebuilt in the dark. It can wait until morning. And for now, sleep can arrive not because everything is clear, but because nothing needs to be clear right now. When Nietzsche spoke of the will to power, he was not talking about domination over others. He was not describing political control or physical strength. He was describing something much quieter and much closer, an inner movement, a tendency within life itself to grow, to shape, to overcome. For Nietzsche, the will to power is not about ruling the world. It is about not collapsing inward. It is the impulse that says, I do not only exist, I become. When old meanings collapse, this inner movement becomes more visible. Without inherited purpose, life must rely on its own force, not on rules, not on traditions, but on vitality. Nietzsche believed that every living being contains a drive, not just to survive, but to expand its form, to express itself more fully, to test its limits, to transform resistance into strength. This does not mean aggression. It means engagement. A life guided only by comfort seeks to avoid resistance. A life guided by inner movement meets resistance and changes through it. This is why Nietzsche saw danger in a world that tries to remove all difficulty. Without challenge, the will becomes weak. Without tension, the self becomes thin. Meaning does not arise from ease. It arises from effort that feels justified. The will to power is not a command. It is not something you force, it is something you notice. It appears when you care deeply about becoming rather than resting, when you prefer growth over stability, when you choose effort over numbness. Nietzsche did not imagine this as constant struggle. He imagined it as a rhythm, expansion and rest, effort and renewal, risk and recovery, but always movement. When nihilism appears, this movement is threatened, not because life stops, but because it loses direction. The will still exists, but it no longer knows what to move toward. This creates frustration, a feeling of energy without aim. Nietzsche believed that the will to power could become the basis for new values, not moral rules, but lived orientations. Instead of asking, what should I obey, the question becomes, what strengthens me? Not in the sense of domination, but in the sense of depth. What increases my capacity to endure, to create, to become? This is not selfishness, it is responsibility, a responsibility to shape oneself rather than wait to be shaped. Nietzsche did not think this was easy. To live without borrowed meaning and still affirm life requires inner strength, not optimism, not blind confidence, but the ability to turn struggle into form. At night, this idea becomes gentle. There is no task to accomplish, no power to prove, only the awareness that life moves even when nothing is decided. Breathing continues. The heart keeps rhythm. The body renews itself without instruction. The will to power does not shout. It whispers. It does not demand conquest. It asks for presence, for attention, for care. Not to dominate the world, but to participate in becoming. Tonight you do not need to grow, you do not need to overcome. It is enough to notice that life has its own movement and that you are part of it. Effort can rest. Ambition can soften. The body can lie still while the deeper movement continues quietly. Sleep does not cancel becoming. It supports it. And for now, meaning does not need to be built. It can remain as a possibility inside the movement of breath and thought slowing down. When old meanings fall away, something fragile appears, not immediately visible, not clearly defined, a space. Nietzsche believed that this space is the true beginning of creation, not creation as invention, but creation as orientation. When inherited values disappear, life does not become meaningless by necessity. It becomes undecided, and what is undecided can be shaped. This is why Nietzsche did not see collapse only as loss. He saw it as openness. Before values were given, now they must be formed, not chosen from a list, not borrowed from authority, but grown from experience. Creation, for Nietzsche, does not mean imagining a fantasy world. It means giving direction to one's own becoming. Instead of asking, "What should I follow?" the question becomes, "What do I affirm?" Affirmation is different from belief. Belief accepts. Affirmation commits. To affirm something is to say, "This is worth my strength. This is worth my struggle. This is worth becoming." Nietzsche believed that only after nihilism can this question be honest. As long as values are inherited, they are obeyed, they are not chosen. But when they collapse, choice becomes real. This does not mean everything is equally valuable. It means value must be tested inside life, through effort, through endurance, through consequence. A value is not something that feels pleasant. It is something that can carry weight, something that can justify effort over time. This is why Nietzsche did not imagine creation as comfort. He imagined it as responsibility. To create a value is to shape a path that did not exist before. Not for everyone, but for oneself. This does not isolate the human being, it deepens them. A life that follows borrowed rules remains light. A life that creates its own direction becomes heavy. But this weight is not suffering, it is seriousness. A seriousness that gives form to movement. Nietzsche did not want people to invent meanings as entertainment. He wanted them to shape themselves as answers. Not through theories, but through lives. Creation in this sense is not artistic fantasy. It is ethical movement, not rules, not commands, orientation, a way of standing inside existence. This is why Nietzsche believed that nihilism was not the enemy of meaning. It was its condition. Only when the old falls can the new appear. At night, this idea becomes gentle. There is no task to create values, no decision to make now. Only the awareness that life does not need to copy its meaning from the past. It can grow its meaning from its own movement. Breath does not follow tradition. It responds to the body. The heart does not obey rules. It keeps rhythm through living. In the same way, meaning does not need to be inherited to exist. It can emerge from engagement, from attention, from care, from choosing what strengthens life. Tonight you do not need to choose your values. It is enough to rest inside the openness where values can appear. The body can sleep without direction. The mind can soften without certainty. And the space left by collapse does not need to be filled. It can simply be held as quiet ground where something new may grow in its own time. When old values collapse, there is a moment of silence. Not destruction, not revelation, just quiet. A world that no longer knows what it should become. Nietzsche did not imagine this moment as dramatic. He imagined it as suspended. A pause between what no longer works and what has not yet appeared. This pause feels strange. It does not tell us what to do. It does not give direction. It does not promise meaning. It simply leaves space. This is where the question quietly enters. Now what? Not as a demand, not as a plan, but as a presence. The old answers have weakened. The inherited paths no longer guide. The rules still exist, but their authority feels thin. And so the world waits. Not for a new doctrine, not for a new commandment, but for a different kind of human. Nietzsche believed that when values collapse, humanity stands at a threshold. Not between belief and disbelief, but between obedience and creation. The question is no longer, what should I follow? It becomes, what can I become? This is not an optimistic question. It does not promise happiness. It does not promise clarity. It only opens a door that does not lead backward to old meanings and does not yet lead forward to new ones. It opens into uncertainty, into a world where meaning is no longer inherited, but slowly formed through becoming. Nietzsche did not think this moment would feel heroic. He thought it would feel empty, a landscape without signs, a road without markings. The danger is not collapse. The danger is stagnation. To stay forever inside the question without moving, to rest in comfort, to shrink desire, to make peace with smallness. But Nietzsche also saw another possibility. Not a savior, not a prophet, but a human being who does not wait for meaning to be given, a human being who does not escape the absence of values, who does not hide inside comfort, but who slowly learns to shape themselves as a response, not through rules, not through doctrines, through becoming. This is what he meant when he spoke of a higher form of human life, not higher in power, not higher in authority, higher in responsibility, a human who can live without borrowed meaning and still say yes to existence, not because life is safe, not because it is explained, but because it is chosen. Tonight the world does not ask you to become this human. It does not ask you to overcome anything. It does not ask you to create values. It only reveals that the old ground is no longer firm, and that something is quietly waiting to be shaped. The question, what now, does not need an answer. It only needs space, space to breathe, space to remain open, space to not return too quickly to comfort. The night does not demand meaning. It does not demand direction. It simply holds the pause between endings and beginnings, between collapse and creation. You do not need to step forward. You do not need to choose a path. You can remain in this quiet interval where nothing is decided, where nothing is promised, where the future is not written in advance. The world may be waiting for new values, but tonight you do not need to provide them. It is enough to let the question exist without closing it, to rest without explanation, to sleep without meaning, not because life has no value, but because value has not yet been named. And the mind can release the task of naming it until morning,